This podcast is brought to you by Mapper Forward's new Patreon community, the Global Coffee Think Tank. Check the show notes or head to patreon.com/Mapper Forward to find out how you can become a member today. Welcome to the Daily Coffee Pro by Mapper Forward, friends. I'm your host, Lee Safar, and we are joined by André Eiermann for episode 4 of our 5-part series talking about the gap between specialty coffee and commercial coffee from a market perspective, not necessarily from a technical green coffee, roasted coffee perspective. So Andre, let's have a very serious conversation about how the challenging times ahead are going to shape the specialty coffee market as we move forward. What are your thoughts on that?
The challenges we have ahead?
Yeah. So what I mean by that, and I should have given you some clarity, so I apologize for that. We're faced with some very serious issues moving forward. We have geopolitical issues, we have economics, we have climate change, we have labor shortages, all in the middle of a time when our industry is really transitioning off the back of a pandemic, having been forced to, adapt and reshape itself to make home brewing something that was front and center for consumers, because that was the way that everybody needed to figure out solutions. In the middle of all of this, as we've been talking about the commercial industry and the specialty industry and the intersection of that, we've been talking about capsule coffee. We've been talking about the different ways that we experience hospitality, etc., etc. If we're talking about consistency, if we're talking about supply, if we're talking about treating people well, and in the last episode what we said was, we're finally getting to a place in our industry where people, as an industry, we're starting to recognize that we have to do better. We have to do better for our people. We have to do better for our suppliers, our producers. We've got to do better for ourselves and make sure that our businesses are actually profitable, because otherwise I'm just too tired to be showing up to my own business anymore and not making any money. As this industry faces this intersectional time, how do you feel that we're going to be reshaped by these challenges that we have ahead as a specialty coffee industry?
First of all, I personally fear that there will be a big shortage or a big risk when it comes to the coffee supply chain.
Supply of green coffee?
Supply of green coffee. There is a lot of research going on led by the World Coffee Research Institute. They are now digging deep, working on their variety booklets, doing their trial hubs around the world to see which species and varieties work the best around the globe in the different climate. Because what we can see, and they have predicted it, in the upcoming years, we will get less and less and less of the tasty coffee because of global warming. Mm-hmm. That is one fear that I have. The tasty those coffees are, the less we will get because of global warming. Then I remember a very emotional presentation at the World Brewers Cup Championship from Carlos Escobar, whose father used to be a coffee farmer. Mm-hmm. But when you talk and you look at championships, very often we are very romantic. We talk about great tasting coffee, very successful farmers. But his talk was the complete opposite, about his father who lives in Colombia, but who left the coffee industry because it is so hard to survive on growing coffee at origin. It's difficult. The input is getting more and more expensive. There is a lot of labor going in, and the prices, that is not something that you can dictate when you negotiate with the traders or with the roasters, because they will tell you how much they pay. You do not have enough negotiation power, if at all you have the contact. But many of the small holders, they do not even have the contacts to reach out to roasters outside their countries. So that is a big threat I see when it comes to producing coffee. Climate change, young people, they don't want to work in coffee anymore. So who is going to grow the coffee that we are going to drink in the next 10, 20, 30 years? If there is not enough money producing it, they will just change and produce another crop, or they will go out of coffee. They maybe want to stop farming in general. So the coffee supply is a big risk when we are looking at from that side. Labor, when yep.
I want to ask you something about that. How aware do you think people in specialty coffee are about the potential for this shortage? We talk about it a lot on this podcast, but in general, how aware do you think people are about the potential for the shortage of green coffee into the future?
I believe the specialty coffee community is aware, especially the roasters, but somehow we just try to put on pink sunglasses to make the world look beautiful, and we hope or we forget that the supply is at risk just because we don't want to see it. But we have to face it. There are those F1 hybrids that seem to be more resistant to climate change, to diseases. So that might be a potential answer to some of the challenges that we are facing. But still, we need people to grow that coffee, and we should pay them fair enough so they can also have a good life. And I'm not talking about they should drive a Ferrari or a Porsche, just having a good life according to the living standards in origin countries. Yeah. So I think we need to make people aware of that.
And I asked that question because there are a lot of things that are really creating like a pressure cooker in our industry right now. Some of them are more immediate than others. And because the green coffee thing isn't quite as immediate, the supply of green coffee isn't quite as immediate, there are other problems with green coffee. Let's talk about inflation for a second. That seems to be the thing that most people are concerned about when it comes to green coffee. Not are there going to be producers who are going to want to be motivated enough to grow coffee in the future, because we've got to get over this first hurdle, which is how do we afford the coffee that is available right now?
Yes, the coffee prices, they are going up and up and up. In the past, and we are heavily dependent on Brazil. If you had a drought or a frost in Brazil, that's when prices were soaring. Mm-hmm. What we see now is really the shortage that we have as well, but all the COVID-related effects. Cherries couldn't be picked because pickers are moving around coffee areas about coffee origins. And due to COVID, they couldn't move. They couldn't move from one farm to the other. So cherries, they just rot on the trees. So we have less coffees. We do not have the supply chain. So some of the coffees, they had to wait in warehouses because no containers were available. So prices are going up, quality somehow going down. And at the end of the day, we have to tell end consumers, there is inflation, okay, there might be a recession, okay, but please pay more for coffee. And I mean, you have a family, you have kids, you have a certain income that you can spend on your daily living, on the veggies, the meat, whatever you need to eat and drink. And I understand if suddenly coffee goes up, many people can't afford. And I'm not talking about your 20 or $30 cup of geisha. I'm talking about a family with 2 or 3 kids. They can anyway not afford. So they would need to look either for a cheaper coffee or maybe drink less. So I strongly believe we will face a big challenge. Prices are going to increase. I can see that instead of increasing prices at this very moment, maybe certain roasters are trying to decrease slightly the quality, especially in blends, to still keep the same consumer price. If all of the roasters will do that, then we will just see a decrease in the general overall coffee quality. I believe on single origins, you can't do that. That's not the majority, but I either see that we will see an increase in consumer pricing or a decrease in the quality.
And how do you think this is going to, all of these factors, how do you think they're going to shape the specialty coffee industry, let's say over the next decade? Where do you think it's headed?
What we have seen in the past, in general, coffee is quite a resistant industry. People tend to give up other things before coffee. Coffee seems to be like an essential product. Without it, you can't live.
Or it's an affordable luxury. But I don't know that it's, and this is why I think that this is a this is a unique time, because it used to be an affordable luxury. Now it seems to be a really expensive, affordable luxury. Like mochas are now $9 in some places around Sydney. You know, your standard latte was expensive at $5, and now with the increase of people drinking alternative milks, now your latte is somewhere around $8 or $9. This is not such an affordable luxury anymore.
Yeah, it's getting more expensive. You would think once it's getting more expensive, the coffee lover will think more about where it's coming from and how much work goes into it.
Will they?
It could be a decisive moment to now leverage.
Yeah, fair point.
And start explaining how it works. I can see that in the coffee industry during the pandemic, there was a lot of consolidation. I saw venture capital companies buying specialty coffee roasters. I saw specialty coffee roasters selling into retail. I saw specialty coffee roasters doing an outstanding job with their online shops, developing their home barista or home brewing segment. But again, the big winners were the chained operators and the large scale roasters. And when I'm looking at, for example, Nespresso, during the pandemic, some of their most favorite or best sellers were sold out because they couldn't produce enough of the easy to consume formats for home brewing. So I see kind of a consolidation.
Is what you're saying that you see the gap shortening between commercial and specialty?
I see that it's getting tight for some of the specialty coffee roasters in a more competitive environment. And large companies are very good at leveraging synergies. at cost cutting, because this is part of like big international
business.
companies, and they focus on the big chunk, and they will neglect investing in the smaller things. So I'm a kind of worried, because it's fantastic to see big companies succeed, having amazing strategies and big purchasing power. But at the end, it's also good and essential to have the little players that come out with new ideas, little players that have the courage to do things differently. And during the pandemic, I already saw some succeeded, others just went out of the business. So I'm really worried that with what we are heading to, we will lose a lot of the little roadsters that maybe have a romantic approach to the business, but they also add a lot of diversity.
So well said. And I think that the shame in that happening is that the big companies, there's a symbiotic relationship between the big companies and the smaller companies. We had someone from Nestle on this podcast a couple of years ago talk to us, someone from ideation of Nestle in Switzerland, come on the podcast and talk about that symbiotic relationship between big companies and small companies. And they rely on the small companies to seed the innovation and to create the proof of concept that allows the bigger companies to consume them, to consume the smaller companies, and then feed them into their distribution networks and then be able to make it more profitable. Now, if we lose, and again, this sets up us perfectly up for the next conversation. If we lose those smaller companies, we are losing the place that I think is the best place for innovation to be seated in our industry, contrary to what most people say, which is WBC and barista competitions are where industry finds its innovation. And I vehemently disagree with that, because I believe that that has the largest microphone for where innovation comes from, but I believe that it is small business where innovation is actually the place we should be looking to tap into all the new ideas for our industry. And we need to stop knocking down small business owners that come up with something different and just looking to barista champions to be the ones that are presenting innovation.
That will be a good discussion.
It's going to be a great discussion. Let's do it. André, you're awesome. Peace, love, and peanut butter, everybody. Have an amazing rest of your day. Thanks, friends. If you enjoyed this video, here's what you should check out next. Consider supporting Map It Forward on Patreon, and be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell before you leave.